The presentation here is opening the black box of big data with sustainable value creation. The idea here is, as a business owner, as a board member of a business, I want to maintain my company sustainable. And not only do I have, in the short term, that means economic stability, means I make money, but also I have to ensure that I have the resources necessary to make my product, and I also have the individuals in the market exist in order to sell my product. So these things are critical for me individually in my company to remain a sustainable and viable company in the future. So we took a look at some topics that are very timely right now, and looked at big data and its value in sustainable performance. And some of the terms we're talking about here, big data itself is the ability to process large volumes of information. The sustainable performance is the ability to maintain operations without having any effect on future generations from being able to maintain their own existence. So you want to have that sustainability there. So we took that and took a look at one of the processes available to us is circular economy practices, which the whole idea behind circular economy practices is to continue to reuse and reuse your resources and minimizing the effect on raw materials. So ideally, we move from this linear economy where most of the things we make nowadays end up not only is there waste during the raw processing, but in the production itself there's waste, and ultimately when the customer finishes with the product, they toss it. So there's a lot of waste in that process. So a circular economy and the practices behind that are straining to take all of those waste and reintroduce it into the production cycle so that there are no losses, ideally no losses, and that becomes a sustainable model. And then supply chain management capabilities, that's the management of the supply chain itself, working with your partners in such a way that you implement your chosen strategy. And that sustainability and that circular economy practices can in itself be a strategy. So that's what we're going to drive our supply chain to, is driving those circular practices. So the title here is opening the black box of big data analytics from the standpoint of we know that there's a relationship between big data and ultimately performance, and in this case sustainable performance, but there's still a lot of question about what is that relationship, where does it come from? So that's the black box. So what we proposed was that, well, we think that there's a relationship between not only big data directly to sustainable performance, but in a relationship that big data supports supply chain management capabilities, and that big data supports the circular economy practices we talked about, and that there's also a sequential moderation that's happening here, that big data supports supply chain, which supports circular economy, which ultimately supports sustainable performance. And so we ran a survey against 210 companies here in Spain. We chose those companies based on profiles set up by the report for sustainability by the European Union, They identified 11 sectors that were critical to circular economy practices and sustainability. So we found that there was 7 of those domains that were strong here in Spain. So that's where we focused our efforts. So we had 210 respondents to our survey. What we found here with the results was that big data does indeed impact sustainable performance. But once we introduced the supply chain management and the circular economy practices elements into that, we found that that relationship actually became non-significant, and that it all passed through this alternate path, the mediation model there. And we did find that individually, that supply chain management does mediate that relationship between big data and sustainability. We found that also that circular economy practices indeed mediated that relationship, and that sequential relationship also mediated that relationship between big data and sustainable performance. The data performed that. What we saw that was really interesting here was that the major contributor to sustainable performance, when we looked at all 3 of those, was this path through circular economy practices. So we saw there is definitely value here in the circular economy practices because that was the major contribution. And then our second highest level contributor was that parallel sequential path that included supply chain management through circular economy practices and then sustainable performance. So what we saw here was that, well, big data analytics is supporting supply chain management capabilities. That's happening because the ability to process the large information, those information systems that are out there, that allow us to share information more readily with our partners, both downstream and upstream. And a critical part of that was just sharing goals, sharing capabilities, and reducing redundancies with organizations because you could share information among those organizations and reduce those redundancies. So big data analytics and supply chain management then supports skills necessary for circular economy practices. What we found here was a very critical part of circular economy practices was logistics in getting the materials back from the client. And big data was a big support for that, in that we could track our materials. We could also track the condition of those materials so we know where to put them back into our reprocessing efforts. Obviously, something that's been highly used and nearly destroyed is going to take a lot more processing than something that's been lightly used and just cycled one time. So that big data helps process that and helps us know how better to process information and increase the efficiency of our overall production chain. And another critical piece of this is that big data analytics are critical, but only when combined with other capabilities. So the idea of just having big data for big data's sake, because it's trendy, because it's neat, is not necessarily going to be profitable for you. You have to use the big data analytics to enable other capabilities in order to actually see the benefits from those investments in big data. So ultimately what we see is, an advice for our managers out there, the practitioners in the field, is that by using big data and supply chain management, you're going to have economic benefit. You're going to be able to see, get your redundancies down, raise your efficiencies, see economic benefit. You're going to also raise the utilization of resources, which means you have to use less raw materials, which helps ensure that you'll have raw materials available for future production of your company, as well as the third pillar of sustainable performance is the social aspect. And so by maintaining social impact, understanding what the impact of your production is on society, then you're ensuring that market continues to exist for your product. So there is benefit for you in the long term for as a business owner or a business manager to seek that sustainable performance through these other methods, because it does help ensure the sustainability not only of the environment, of our world, but your business within that environment.